where, you know, when we think of mental health, we'll be thinking, okay, somebody is, you know, schizophrenic or some of these things. So really, mental health is just a state of well-being. So a state of well-being that allows you to think of a person who's able to have a sound mind, able to make good judgment, able to cope with some of the stresses that they're dealing with on a daily basis. I think that's more of the clinical definition. But when I really think about mental health, for me, it's like just being able to flow through life and handle everything that's being thrown at you and be able to do it and manage it. So of course, now you think about us going through a pandemic, a person that has optimum or good mental health is an individual that's able to handle the different stresses that are going on with all the different changes that are happening also, and able to not only cope, but able to thrive through it.
Follow-up question: what are some things that maybe get confused as, oh, I mentally like people that, I don't know how to phrase it, like when people think that the other person is mentally like unstable, what are like some of the confusions or misnomers, or people that what do people think, like what are the wrong things, or what isn't as I should say mental health?
So I think the big thing about it is, you know, as you just said, what are some of the things that people think, right? When we think about mental health, there's an emotional component to it, there's a psychological component, and also just a social well-being component. It affects every area of our life. So a lot of times people will think that, you know, maybe just because they are not, or they're sad, for instance, right? That means that they have a mental illness. No, I think mental health exists on a continuum, meaning that every single one of us throughout our life, throughout the daily, we all go through and have experiences with mental health. It is a part of life. There is no health without mental health. So a lot of times it's just really knowing that, and knowing that if you have a thought about it and you're just thinking somebody else have it, you also have it too. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not something to be ashamed about. So those are some of the things that a lot of times people think, you know, in terms of mental health being a sign of weakness, being something to be shameful about. It's all in your mind. It doesn't really exist. You know, a lot of times you hear that, you know, parents say that, like, oh, stop thinking like that, you know. It's not something that is negative. It's not always negative. It's something that intrinsically we all experience. So if feeling good all the time is not optimum, it's not actually possible. So those moods that we go through, those life transactions that happen to us, those are things that we have to understand that, you know, if you see somebody kind of going through it, it's not something that they're faking. It actually is, it exists.
Okay, so as we go through this, and obviously we know the community that is on this call, we're all from the Toronto Guinean community. So let's keep it there for now, as like what, like when it comes to our like community, because that's all we know, you know, as for most of us, we're all, our parents are Guinean, we are born of Guinean parents, or from Ghana. So what, when it comes to mental health in our community, again, what is like the things that are said? Like, how comes maybe some people don't feel comfortable speaking about it? Like you said, some people think, oh, it's in your head, it doesn't exist, right? So let's keep it in our community. What are your thoughts about mental health within the Guineans?
Well, I think within the Ghanaian community specifically, we know that mental health is demonized in a sense, right? You know, when we talk about mental health, it's something that a lot of times it's not welcomed. You know, it takes a certain level of understanding to unpack it. We know that it's a generational gap in terms of how a lot of our parents see and experience their own mental health and wellness journey. So a lot of times that gap is what we now have our kids kind of going through some of the challenges of, you know, our generation, and you kind of find that we're not able to bridge that gap. I think mental health as a whole, it is not just a situation where you're being prescribed or it's associated with medication. Sometimes when we think about mental health as a community, we don't understand it in our community that it's just a state of well-being. It's heavily and quickly associated with a prescribed medication or heavy depression or, you know, schizophrenia, these heavy terms. And then there is no trust within the community, right? So we don't even talk about it. So in our community, that's what also doesn't exist. You know, the trust is not there. So a lot of times when we have people that are loved ones that are struggling, we don't even ask or start talking about it so we could actually get access to the right information. So it's a conversation that is it doesn't happen with the right people. It doesn't happen as a community. And because of that, you know, different thoughts are kind of, you know, isolated about it. There's a heavy stigma, heavy stigma when we talk about mental health. And, you know, so I could only experience, like, you know, you can't talk about it with your parents at a certain level, right? And so for our community, that's what a lot of times, you know, it gets down to. I've had many experiences in my professional career where I've sat down with, as we're talking about the Ghanaian community, where I've sat down meetings with Ghanaian parents and their kids. And, I had involvement where I was doing school social work, and I would sit down in a meeting, the child would be sharing with the parent present that they're depressed. And quickly, the parent would, respond and say, hey, what is depression? You don't know what depression is, right? So there's always this, there's no validation for mental health in our community. It's quickly viewed as something that, it doesn't exist. You're faking it. You're not resilient. You're not strong. So you get that you get people internalizing a lot of things that they should actually be sharing.
So what would you tell to the parents? Not even all parents. The people that think that way. How would you approach those people or talk to those people?
I think the biggest thing is, we know that support looks different for everyone. So admitting that or seeking support for mental health does not mean that you're going to go through, the process of, being diagnosed or you're going to not be able to cope the way that you cope. Our community, we cope very differently. Our community, it takes a village, if you look at how we're raised back home, right? So it doesn't mean that if you have a mental illness or if you're struggling with a mental health condition, you cannot still seek the same community-based support, or you cannot still be associated and benefit from your religious involvement. I think a lot of times, our minds goes very quickly to what everybody else is going to say if you talk about having a mental illness. And because of that, nobody talks about it. Mental health, right? A lot of times, the onset of mental health, 70% of it starts between the age of 17 and I think 24. So we're talking about, a lot of parents have a chance to actually support their kids very early. But when we don't support them, that's when the kids very quickly pick up what? The substances. Because a lot of substance use is to cope. Coping with what? Anxiety, coping with depression. We know what kids are looking for when they pick up substances, right? And look at how much people are abusing substances now. So these are all different things that not talking about it kind of then allows people to pick up all the different ways to cope, right? Because I'm not going to come home and tell my parents that I'm going through something, and that's heavily the issue a lot of times.
I have a lot of questions here, and I'm actually even going off script to ask you certain questions. But there's two types. There's mental health and there's mental illness. So can you explain the difference between the two?
So when we talk about mental health, we're talking about just the state of being. We're talking about the emotional, psychological, and social state of being. We're talking about how you are functioning and coping with just the daily stresses of life. That's mental health. When you talk about mental illness, you're talking about, how we're thinking, how you're feeling, how you're acting. So a lot of times a person that has a mental illness, you are able to notice that there are changes with regard to their mood. So those are like mood disorders, or an individual that is chronically are affected by depression or bipolar or schizophrenia. So you're getting mental illness speaks to, it's an illness that kind of actually changes the person in terms of how, they're experiencing different things. So whether it's a personality disorder, eating disorder, these are all things that are identified. A person that's gambling, for example, that's also something that where there's actual changes in the brain in terms of how they're thinking and then affecting how they're acting, if that makes sense.
Okay, so how do you notice?
So mental health is coping. Mental health is the coping side of it. Mental illness, if we're talking about mental illness or you get to the stage of mental illness, we're talking about actually changes to how you think and how you act and how you feel.
All right, so thank you for that. So how do you notice maybe if somebody's depressed and doesn't want to say it, maybe they feel uncomfortable saying it to you? So how do you notice anything like that? And if you do notice, how do you approach them if maybe they don't feel comfortable, maybe coming to you first?
A big thing about mental illness, mental health, we're talking about just the coping side of it, right? But we're talking about if you're talking about mental illness, you're going to see that for both of them, each and every one of us have a baseline. I'm sure your parents know your baseline. I'm sure you know your siblings' baseline. So when you're noticing that somebody is slipping away from their baseline, so when we talk about baseline, we're talking about routines. So all of a sudden you're seeing a person sleeping in heavily, meaning that this person doesn't always sleep in. Kofi's usually able to get up and function and go to work and go to school and be able to do the things that he's supposed to do as part of his daily baseline, his daily routine. Kofi slipping away from Kofi has dramatically slipped away from his daily routine. He's sleeping in. Kofi is not showering. Kofi is not able to function and meet the daily needs. So from an observatory lens, if you're around somebody, right, it's those slight behavioral changes that start to, you will notice it if you're around a person that, okay, this is very strange. I'm also noticing this person drinking a lot. This person doesn't drink like this. Or this person has a baseline of just being an occasional drinker, but now you're seeing that they're increasingly using a substance to cope. So the best way to notice if somebody around you is going through something, or it's just by the baseline of the individual. Sometimes it's the mood changes. So if all of a sudden, wow, this person is always, dramatic mood changes, you're like, okay, this guy was never like that. Withdrawn. So you have a sibling or a parent, all of a sudden they're very withdrawn. So even if you have a relationship, you have a partner, and all of a sudden they're very withdrawn, you see a significant drop in their overall functioning, meaning that, this person, if you're a young child, all of a sudden he's failing school, the teachers are calling in and complaining. If you're an adult, all of a sudden at work, there are issues going on in terms of their work. And so different, a lot of times when you notice a person being emotionally disconnected, these are all different things that point to mental health. And with early intervention, prognosis is always better. So a lot of times if you want to help somebody, it's all about, and that's the second question you asked, it's all about being able to create a safe space. A safe space meaning that you cannot be judgmental. Judgmental meaning that, if your child is telling you that they have or they're dealing with just even not feeling well, they're not doing well, you cannot be judgmental in such that you cannot be not validating them. You cannot be also not telling them that this thing that you're going through is fake. So to really help a person, you have to just first establish the lines of communication, because the child is going to eventually talk about it, but you just want to, as a parent or as a friend, you want to be able to have them talk to you first. And then you cannot overreact. It's all about just kind of being able to create a space for the person so that if you are noticing that sometimes they're even in crisis in terms of, they're at risk of suicide or some of these things, they actually tell you so that you'll be able to help them.
All right, thank you for that. So the next question I have here is, what are some factors that may contribute to mental illness in our society?
Wow, stress. Stress is a big thing, right? But a lot of times when you look at it, stress is a big thing that's affecting all of us. But, family history of mental illness is a big factor. So a lot of times because we don't want to talk about it, we don't acknowledge it. Family history is huge. We know that sometimes even complications at birth. We know that a personal history of having like a traumatic event. Sometimes chronic illness could also affect a mental health, whether it be diabetes, cancer. We know that the use of alcohol and drugs, trauma. We know that neglect is also huge, that's something that could affect somebody in terms of their mental health and wellness. So these are all different things in terms of, really all the different things that happen. Anything that happens that has an impact on you is actually something that, if not really recognized, can have an overall effect on your mental health and well-being.
Okay, so from your perspective, you touched on it a little bit, but why is there that gap between like the older and younger generation when it comes to this? Why is there why do you think there's a gap? You talked about that some people, they talk down upon it, but why is there such a gap? Maybe it's why some children can't approach their parents or maybe their older siblings and they resort to the things.
Well, you know what? I think a lot of the gaps also, if you see it, our parents were raised back home. A lot of our parents were raised back home, raised in a culture where it was not spoken about. Mental health is heavily, you look at Ghana, even, in our culture, marrying somebody that has even mental health in their family is something that is seen as you have to be careful about, right? This is like a screening question. Does this person's family has mental health? So mental health is heavily discouraged, or it's not something that we want to talk about. So this gap, you now have kids who are growing up in Canada. I don't know how much of our parents back home in Ghana experience racism. Kids are actually really struggling now. So the experiences of Canadian kids are totally different. Anxiety is very common for kids. We're talking about what, 1 in 5 kids in Canada that live in this part of the world is being diagnosed with a mental illness. So this is something that, is very, very, very different. We're talking about how kids live in school here and the different supports that are also in place. So our parents didn't grow up here to know and even better understand some of the stresses that exist within our community. A lot of time, that's where the gap naturally starts, because the kids are talking about concerns that the parents cannot relate to. A lot of times, for you to be able to empathize with somebody, you have to be able to relate to them. We are not able to relate to the kids. Why? Because we don't understand them. And that's why a lot of times, it comes off first as judgment. It comes off as, lack of empathy towards our kids, that are actually struggling. And we know a lot of times the parents are also struggling with themselves. A lot of our parents, a lot of our parents, a lot of men in general, a lot of Black men specifically, suicide rates are very high. Suicide happens in our community, but these are all different things that nobody wants to talk about. So that's where the gap comes from, right? Because the gap exists when you don't acknowledge your own mental health. If you're not acknowledging something for yourself, and how are you gonna acknowledge it for your own kids?
Okay, so what if somebody is going through something and maybe they don't feel comfortable with their parents, or where can they go to get help? And like, would you suggest maybe someone that like you don't know, maybe because maybe that you feel comfortable, maybe they don't know, they can't judge you, or do you suggest that you do talk to a parent or someone that you do know and that loves you?
So Kofi, I have a question. In our community, if the kid goes and tells anybody else before telling their parents, that is also part of the problem. At that point, it's not even the problem you're facing. It's the fact that you went and did what? Spoke about this to the community. But at the same time, the kids can't speak about it at home and get validation. So my thing is, the kids have multiple relationships, whether it's relationships with friends, whether it's relationships with school teachers, whether it's relationships with their coaches. So if you're not creating a safe space at home for your child to speak, they're going to eventually speak to somebody else. And how that actually happens is other worried people actually see the kids, because teachers spend 8 hours a day with a child. So they'll be able to see very quickly that this child is not doing well. So whether you're busy at home and, you come home late from work, so you're not really observing the child, or your son is telling you stuff at home and you're not listening to them, somebody else they're going to tell somebody. If you're lucky as a parent that they actually tell somebody. So for me, I'll say the advice is tell somebody. You have teachers. The circle of care is bigger than the home. You also, right now we're on a church platform. There's a lot of church leaders, youth leaders. There's also, you have your pastor. So we have a community, and we know that it takes a community, and our community is built. So, but the thing is, hopefully you tell the right person, because if you mention this also to somebody at church that you're having a mental health issue, how are they going to respond? That's my question for you. How would they respond, Kofi?
I actually wouldn't know. Like, I don't know how they respond. Because again, like you said, it depends who you're talking to.
It depends who you're talking to. And the thing about it is, a lot of times their level of understanding is based on how they will respond. So if you go and, we're saying this, but if you say this to a pastor, I'm dealing with a mental health issue, my question is, there's going to be support that's going to be provided, right? But are we really assessing to see the nature of the issues? A lot of times, are we even putting together a right, safety plan for a child, for an individual? Because a lot of times people disclose, I'm having thoughts of self-harm, I'm having thoughts of killing myself. Is that person going to get connected to the right support? Or is it going to be us actually having, or is it going to just be, a strong prayer session and then we walk away?
Okay, so what are the steps? What are the steps? Can you go through like the steps? Like, if you approach somebody, how do you approach them? What do you say? Like, do you like pour your heart to them all at once? Do you give them some information a little bit at a time? And as for a person that's maybe receiving this information, somebody's coming to you with this, how do you respond? Like, the steps for
Kofi,
that.
I love the question. You see, the person listening, right? Your job is just to listen. If you're not a mental health profession, your job is not to be doing an assessment. Your job is actually to help them get to the right person. If you're the person listening to somebody telling you that they're having thoughts of harming themselves, if you're not a mental health professional, you're not a trained professional, you have to be very careful what you even say to the person. Because that person that's telling you this stuff, if you don't sometimes actually respond to them correctly, this might also lead them in the bad towards, because they've already been turned away from every other system. So if they come to you as the person they trust and they tell you this, I think a lot of times, if you are doing, you're doing that person right and you really want to help them, it's actually helping them get connected to the right person. A lot of times, the easiest thing I say to everybody is, everybody has a family doctor. Healthcare is free. It always starts with a family doctor. Family doctors are more than trained, and they have a history. They have a relationship with this individual. So even if you don't want to, you don't want to tell the person's parent, make sure that they get connected with a family doctor, and make sure that that is a step that you do with them, right? Whether it's creating an appointment with them to kind of get a check by a professional. So it's part of that kind of conversation. It's heavy when somebody tells you they want to harm themselves. Your job, though, is not to be their therapist. Your job is to make sure that they're connected to the right person. And a lot of times, if you don't want to call 911 because of the thoughts of self-harm that they're disclosing to you, or call for emergency intervention, then make sure that you're connecting them to a health professional that can help you. So you get one of the two. And this also goes for parents with kids, because kids say this kind of stuff a lot, but you have to take it serious. But that is maybe at a high level. But if somebody is generally telling you that they're not coping well, they're not doing well, a simple assessment will be just to make sure that you're listening. Is just listen to them. Listen and validate. There's so much power in that. Even the baseline of therapy is just talk therapy, is really kind of creating space for people to share. As a parent, it should be something that should be automatic that we share with our kids. So just listening. And you don't have to challenge them. Just listen. Everybody has the cure, but if somebody telling you something that's wrong, your job is just to listen. It's so important. Listen. So I think that's the step. And not trying to solve that person's problem because you think you can. I think that's also different, because every support looks different for everyone. And this is where we also get that gap, right? So imagine a parent that's never, a lot of our parents don't even go to church, don't even go get a doctor's assessment. So they're probably not going to go to a doctor. But don't think that because I'm not going to go to a doctor about this, right, I'm also not going to help the child speak to a professional. So I think that's the big gap. It has to happen.
All right. So you talked about a little bit earlier about how people cope with maybe mental illness, right? So what are maybe some good ways to cope with it? Like, you don't have to resort to drugs or gambling. Or what are some good ways that, if you want to cope with it, that you can do?
You know what? That's an excellent question. The first thing is education. If you don't know what's going on, you don't know what's even happening. So psychoeducation is huge. I think we need to open ourselves up to learning about our mental health. When we think about our physical health, a lot of times people talk about diet. Oh, I'm going to eat better. You know what I mean, right? Similarly, you have to educate yourself as to how, just to even understanding, what depression, what the causes are, some of the symptoms of it, so that you understand that things that are happening around you could impact you. I think another way is lifestyle changes. Exercise is huge. Having a social network, having a support network. Nutrition is huge. Sleep is amazing. Stress is even bigger. Stress reduction. So I think a lot of times those are things that every one of us can do instantly. Learning more about mental health and how you can't have health without mental health. And then the lifestyle changes are things you could all do by yourself. But of course, if you're requiring more support, the best way to cope with it is actually get checked out. Go to your family doctor. Your family doctor could do a quick assessment and actually be able to kind of help you on your next step. Another big thing is psychotherapy, having and creating space in your life so that you could talk to a professional about some of the challenges that are going on, who is trained and has a deep understanding of some of the issues that you're dealing with and can actually help you navigate it. That is so invaluable. Very, very, very valuable. So I think it's very, very, very important. Relaxation techniques are amazing. Also, just to really know how to calm yourself down, especially when so much different things is happening. We also know how amazing, some of mindfulness, prayer, having a church group, even what we're doing right now. This is all psychoeducation, right? Really creating learning opportunities for ourselves. So I think it's very huge. But if you are struggling with mental health, being part of a community is huge. It's the best thing you can do, because when you have a support network around you, that's one step. A very, very, very big thing is, really understanding that you don't have to do it by yourself. When you have caring people around you, it really helps. And people always care about you and are there to help you. So it's always kind of knowing that and creating that opportunity for people to help you. So, church is huge. In our community, it takes a village. You know how back home we were raised, the community is all involved. So if you're struggling with mental health, make sure that you're a part of a group, and a group that's not judgmental, and you have people to talk to.
Okay, so as we are continuing, if you guys have any questions, you can again put it in the chat, and I can then ask Michael. You can put it, if you're listening through YouTube as well, I have the YouTube stream up on my phone. So if you have any questions there also, I'm also looking there if you have any questions. So please feel free and ask any questions. This is a great time. We have a professional here that's here to help us. So another question I have is, what are some tips that you can share with us to keep good mental health?
So right now, I'll start, because we're all locked up right now. Social isolation is, it's counteractive to just being young. Kids like to be social. Kids like to go out. Humans in general, we like to go out. So when we're being isolated, this is things that right away we know that it's going against, our who we are as beings. So connection is huge. A lot of times we have to, right now especially, we have to make that concerted effort to connect with people. I think even what we're doing right now, like we're connecting, it helps. So although we're being recommended to stay inside, number one tip: connect with people. Connect with the outside world. The sun does so much for us. The vitamin D that we get, like, get outside. So this, just because of course we have to stay like this, doesn't mean that you should not do some of the baseline things to help you. I think we've lost a lot of ourselves. When we think about kids and how kids cope, we sports is gone. All these different things that naturally helped our mental health. So you have to find ways to replace that. It's all about really kind of working within yourself, and looking at your situation, and being able to kind of flow from there. I think another very important thing as a tip is, don't look at the people that you're with in your space and think that, and I'm going to do what they're doing, because support looks different for everyone. So right now is the best time to actually look at yourself, like, what helps you stay happy? For me, if I don't work out, so I have to buy some weights. So that's a tip that I have to get for myself. If I don't go for a walk, I'm done. So I try to get outside every day. I try to work out. I try to eat well. And then these are little things that I think we could all do to really kind of keep ourselves going each and every day.
All right, thank you. I got a couple of questions here from the YouTube stream. Do you have to suffer from diagnosed mental health issues before you can go to it?
Say it again, you chipped out a bit. Sorry about that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have to suffer from diagnosed mental health issues before going to a therapist?
No. It's best when it's preventative. Creating space to talk about your issues or stresses that you're dealing with life is actually best, because a lot of times, when there are unaddressed mental health issues, that's what turns into some of these more depressing situations that we talk about, right? So when you need just even tips, like what we're doing right now, talking about tips to cope better, you can do this in psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is not meant for only crisis situations or dire situations. It's actually more productive when you're actually making it as a part of your life, just to talk to somebody and kind of create space to kind of address your well-being. And well-being is something that's constantly changing. Why? Because life is constantly changing. So having a space where you could talk to somebody and just say, hey, I'm going to talk about this right now, and focus on addressing my overall well-being, is actually best when you do it like that.
Okay, thank you. And another question is, like, are there Christian therapists? Like, is there like I know there probably are, of course there are, but how do we find or get in touch with any Christian therapists?
Wow. So if you are looking for a therapist, a psychotherapist, or a great thing to do is, do a free consultation, and in any free consultation, you can actually ask the professional if, they are, what their religious faith is, what they're able to kind of provide that support from a Christian or religious lens. For us here at Support and Growth, our platform, we do have multiple practitioners, both male and female. So you could even get a practitioner if you wanted to speak to somebody else male. We speak 10 different languages. So when you're asking for support, make sure that it actually complements who you are. It has that culturally responsive lens, and that you feel that you could actually share with the person, because that's when it works best. When you feel safe, you feel welcome, you don't have to tell your story 10 times. So if you want somebody that is able to support you from a Christian lens, we know spirituality is actually, it's everything for all of us, right? On this platform. So there's nothing wrong with having a practitioner or working with a professional that also has that same lens and belief. And that is actually something that you should, if you want to have.
Okay, so how about if um, you want to talk to somebody, but you want to remain anonymous? Like, you want to talk to someone, but you don't want them to know who you are. Can you do that? Do you recommend that, or do you recommend trying to being strong and doing it that way?
To tell you the truth, at our practice, I'll speak about our practice. We would not speak to you if you wanted to be anonymous. Why? Because we work within the college. We're registered professionals. So for us, we have to do documentation. We have to also be able to create a safety plan for you. Say you called me and said you were in crisis. So if I cannot identify who I'm talking to, right? What if you disclose something and you are actually in crisis? I will not be able to do my due diligence to support you. And so we wouldn't take any clients if it was anonymous or you're giving us a John Doe, because we have to be able to identify who we're working with, because that is part of our college registration. But if you were in that situation, calling some of the helplines will be probably a tier 1 intervention for you. Maybe trying text-based, this text messaging therapy that is now out there, which provides more of that anonymous kind of vibe. But I know for registered professionals, it's very difficult for us to be able to provide you the support without knowing who we're speaking to, just because you could say anything to us, and if we cannot be able to react and support you, it's not good for the work that we're doing from an ethical standpoint.
Okay. Again, if you want to ask questions, I got the last couple of questions from YouTube. So again, feel free. I think we finished here at, I believe, 5. So again, you have about 15 minutes to get your questions. And if you have, don't be, nervous. We're not here to judge anybody. So please send your questions in. So I want to go back to like the Ghanaian community, because that's something that we all have in common, most, I believe, on this call. So how do we promote this, because again, maybe there's an old school mindset going into maybe my generation under me. So going forward, how do we promote healthy dialogue about this?
You know what we're doing right now is an example. So I want to thank you guys for allowing me to come on this platform today, because we have to take ownership of this topic. We have to take ownership of mental health. We cannot only talk about mental health when bell let's talk. To be honest, I don't think some of those services or resources reach back to our community. For us, we know where support starts, whether it's at home, whether it's in our community groups, whether it's at church. So that's where we have to start these conversations about wellness, well-being, health. This is where we have to start it, at that level. So I think we have to take ownership of the conversation and change that narrative. A lot of times, the saddest thing is for a parent to find out that their child is struggling with mental health issues from a teacher or from an outside professional, because the parent never spoke to the child about it at home. And that's what a lot of times will happen if you don't talk about it at home. So really, we have to start it at home, which is here right now where we're talking about it. So our community leaders need to have more of these conversations to unpack, to really understand how kids are feeling. Look at the last year that we've had. Forget the pandemic. We're talking about all the social unrest that's been happening in the community. Look at how the last 24 hours, Black Canadians have been responding to the police being able to stop us and pull us over. That is anxiety. That is trauma. These are things that we need to be talking about, because these are things that affect us as a community. And anything that affects you has an impact on your overall health. We carry so much stress, and we don't see that stress, but At the top of it, when you see the statistics, the death statistics, 57, we're talking about high blood pressure, high, stress, cholesterol, all these things. Our community, we're at the top of all of it. Why do we carry so much stress? But that's where the conversation starts. We have to talk about it. This has to be a conversation that we talk about, because, when we don't have these conversations with our kids, or we don't make space for it, it's almost like we're acting like they don't exist. They do, because the moment you jump in your car, you feel it.
All right, so I went through your when I introduced you, talked about your upbringing. So I was just wondering if, I know you're a professional, but if your examples growing up of mental health, how you dealt with it, and what I read is like your friends dealt with it. So if you can tell us maybe some stories.
Kofi, you're a great host. I'll tell you this. So what even led me to doing what I'm doing now? I grew up in Woolwich. I'm sure Woolwich is like a cultural place for a lot of, not just Ghanaians. I think everybody went through Woolwich, and I think very early what I realized in Woolwich was that, mental health is a topic that we didn't even speak about. And it's funny because there's so much individuals within our community there that we could each say that, oh, wow, this guy, there's something going on, there's something wrong with him. But because of how we kind of looked at it as kids, we never acknowledged it. So fast forward a few years, because I lived in Woolwich from, I think, from like elementary school, I lived in Woolwich. By the time I reached high school, all my friends were using drugs. I say this and I say it, and I sorry if I have a friend that's listening to it now, but all my friends were using drugs. It didn't make sense to me, but it became the way of even chilling. It became the way of coping. It made no sense, but then you see, then it progressed from marijuana. Then I started having friends, using cocaine, using, crack. So by the time I got to university, I'm now getting phone calls that some of my friends that I was in high school with are using these level substances. To make it worse, I'm in university. I'm seeing some of my friends on national TV for Canada's Most Wanted. It made absolutely no sense to me. So I had a friend that I ended up calling his mother, and I'm like, because I couldn't get in contact with him. So I called his house phone, and I spoke to his mother, and his mother shared, his mom's like, I'm hearing that, he's not well. And his mom told me, like, Michael, we need an intervention. And I will never forget those words. That was my childhood best friend. And for me to see the transformation of this individual from, us playing, and then all of a sudden he's doing cocaine, crack, it made no sense to me. A lot of times, and the cops also don't understand this, because this is where they only see behavior. So the behaviors that now he was demonstrating in the community, this is what led him getting arrested. And once you get entangled with the system, now you're in the system. So I had lots of examples of friends that were just struggling with mental health. And you know what? It's very sad, because they weren't even going to our community jails. They were going to mental health jails. I had a friend that the Jehovah's Witness that come door to door ended up assaulting the Jehovah's Witness. In Woolwich, it was very common to have Jehovah's Witness knock your door. A friend attacked 2 Caucasians. As a Black man, you do that. He attacked 2 Caucasians and ran away. And if it's not mental health, what else do we have as an explanation for that? When you attack 2 religious individuals in the community, we all knew these individuals, that because they dress in a white shirt, black pants, they walk around with their Bible in their hand. What would lead an individual to attack a Jehovah's Witness? So all this stuff sat on my head, and it became something that, as I seen more of it, I didn't get it. But I knew that the community also didn't understand it, because as I'm at school, I'm hearing calls that this person is crazy, this person is this person is that. So I think, before we call individuals crazy, we have to look at what we're doing. How can we have intervened? How can we have helped each other? And this is what I'm hoping, that as a community, we could start these conversations earlier. Because as I said, 70% of mental illness, the onset is between 15 and 24. And both of my friends that I'm speaking about, they fell into those years.
Well, that's a powerful story. But you mentioned something that what was, you didn't understand why maybe your friend was attacking the people knocking on the door. As a professional, has there ever been like some instances where they've used mental illness as an excuse, but maybe that really wasn't the case? Like, I don't want to say they were faking it because that's insensitive to it, but as a professional, has there been like times where maybe where people use the term mental illness, mental health so lightly that it's like they just make it an excuse?
You see, it's a good thing you just said that, because when we're talking about mental illness specifically, we're speaking about how an individual's actions, thought patterns, actions, and behaviors are affected and are outside of their baseline. So why I knew this was not this, or why I felt this was mental health related, because both individuals that I'm speaking about, it was outside of their baseline, meaning that this is not how they were 9 to 5. This is not how they were to their parents, meaning that the whole community, everybody's shocked by the behavior. But when there's mental illness present, it affects the way you think and act. So what the police see though is just behavior. The criminal system just sees behavior. So we're talking about kids. If you look at the suspension rates in Toronto District School Board, they see behavior. The child that acts out in class, the child that is fighting his teacher, the child that why would a 12-year-old knock out his teacher, Kofi?
Mm-hmm. He wouldn't.
But he goes home and there's nothing wrong with this young man. And then the parents show up at school and they don't even know why this happened. So how some of the advocacy work that is done to get a file or a case to even get to mental health court, because that's some of the work that we do also at Support and Growth. We work with lawyers to kind of help some of our clients that we know that there's an existence of mental health issues. We try to help bring an understanding to maybe there are some root issues, whether it's history of trauma, history of mental health at home, life circumstances that have happened that have impacted this individual. And then we try to use, because I mean, your guess is as good as mine as to why somebody would beat up a Jehovah's Witness then.
Somebody raised their hand here. Okay, I think I can unmute. So I don't know if this is Uncle Victor, but Victor, you can unmute yourself and then you can ask a question if you want.
Yeah, thanks, Kofi. That's me. Yeah, thanks so much, Mr. Asiama. I'm sorry, hold on. That's a little bit noisy. I'm sorry, I'm just in the wrong place. I'm just kidding. Okay, thanks so much, Mr. Asiama. I think you're talking typically to African parents. Yes. The reason I'm saying that is I know maybe your parents, I don't know when you came to Canada or you were born here or whatever, but the one of the issues here and one of the things sometimes you as a parents tangle with it is mostly about the way you were raised back home compared to what you are meeting or what you are facing here. In terms of your work and your research and everything, do you see a way that we as a parent, that's what I say, I use the word unquote, typically African or Ghanaian. Mm-hmm. Is there a way that we as a parents, our way of doing things and our behavior and our approach may also cause some of the issues to our kids here? That's what I was just coming from, how we were raised back home. Our approach from our parents, exactly the same thing sometimes you also exhibit here to our kids. And do you see a good way, a way that we treat our kids here, how you handle issues with them? may also cause some kind of mental issues to the kids? Thank you.
Uncle Victor, thank you very much for that question. I think it's a very deep one, because we want to, I came here at a very young age, but I understand the struggle of my mom and what her level of resilience. So for our parents that came here and did that journey to get here, whatever you guys did, we understand and we know that your courage, we can never match that. You hear stories, sometimes, the approach that comes from our parents is, oh, like, I had to do all this stuff to come abroad. And these heavy stories that, we cannot even imagine or go through that, because we were also grown up and raised here. So we did not have to go through that. There's a lot of great stories that our parents tell about, oh, I had to go to jail to even get here. But you see that level of resilience, or when I came here, I worked years of factory. You guys are strong. The generation that came again before us, you guys are strong. So I know the approach, Uncle, is that you guys want to make us very strong too. But see, when you raise a kid in Canada, the approach is, self-love and compassion. They are looking at you to see how you're coping, if you want them to do well. And when I say compassion, is the kids have to know that they're being heard, because all their friends, when they go to school, here, it's a community approach, right? When you see how kids go to school, they're telling them, oh, how you feeling? But at home, they cannot share those deep emotions because, it's not being validated by their parents. I think what our parents can do best for us is open that door. Open that door and remove the expectations that we can only ask for help from our parents. You can't go outside and tell somebody else your problem, because then if you're not creating that home environment for them, then they just don't talk to anybody, which is also not good for a child's well-being. But two, it's the parents have to also be more willing to talk about some of their struggles, where their challenges are. Because we know that a lot of times if we have parents that are also dealt with some of these challenges that we're dealing with, as we spoke about, sometimes mental health is in the family, but it's something that will not be spoken about to the kids, right? So how then can we have that open dialogue and continue to educate the kids? Because when they know, they will do better. You could teach the kids how to cope, teach the kids everything. And so it's a very fine line. It's a difficult question you ask, Uncle Victor, because I think, every family does it differently, right? But I think at the baseline of it, we have to, be able to practice from a place of using more vulnerability with our kids, not about our stories of resilience and how we went to jail on our way here and survived, but rather our low moments and what we did to come out of it. Because then the kids are going to see that our parents also went through some of these challenges and then use that to better themselves.
We have 2 hands that are raised. Unless Uncle Victor, you have something you want to add. But
no, I'm okay, Kofi.
All right.
Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks so much.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So I see Ransford first. Uncle Ransford, if that's you can unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment regarding the way society creates labels. How we create labels has a great impact in determining how a problem is solved. For instance, if you label or define somebody or a group as disabled, it determines how they can access resources. Right? So when it comes to mental health, I think one of the biggest problems is the conflation of mental health and mental illness. I think Mr. Siema, you may have alluded to it or even touched on it. So if we're going to conflate these two, then we're going to have a big problem solving the issue. And so I would suggest, and I think this has political connotations, right? It has to come from the political leadership. Education will be key here, right? Otherwise, if we synonymize mental illness and mental health, then I dare say that everybody is mentally ill. And I think, Kofi, along the line, you were talking about misnomers, and one of the misnomers I personally find is with the Center for Addictions and Mental Health. I personally find that name a huge misnomer. One, addiction, the word addiction has negative connotations already. And if we know that mental health is separate from mental illness, conflating or juxtaposing addiction and mental health, for me, is one of the biggest misnomers. So we need to undertake a huge educational drive to strike a difference between mental health and mental illness. In that case, then we can lay the groundwork to solving the issue. Thank you.
Uncle Ransford, I really appreciate that point, because you hit it right on. There's a large confusion between the two, mental health and mental illness. But if you look at it, I think you kind of spoke about it from a political, capital level. There's benefit in mental illness. There's prescription drugs makes pharmaceutical companies money. So that tier one education, a lot of times, is not the priority. So it goes back to, as you just mentioned, we have to take control of this narrative and speak about it. And also, it has to be led by us, because if this information is not coming from us, a lot of times we cannot rely on Bell Let's Talk to have this constant conversation about mental health, because how we cope as a community is also very different. So I really appreciate that point you made. We have to really do everything that we need to do at our level to be able to just, at least for the next generation, differentiate the two, right? And even if there's mental illness, mental illness is something that you can live with. And you could still live a complete life, as long as you are connecting, you're identifying it early enough. And, it's a community approach to supporting each other that removes the stigma that is associated with, meaning that a person coming to church that has a mental health issue does not mean that, they're being excused from church, but rather there's an environment that is there to support them. I say this because there are churches, and I've been aware of, community organizations that, because they don't know how to deal with mental health, they've actually removed individuals from church and community settings. And that is not productive, right? So a lot of times, this is where we all have to educate ourselves so that we're creating these environments that people will feel welcome. And as you said, even speaking about with disability, right? We acknowledge it not as a disability rather, right? But something that is a function of life, so that we could all be able to help each other and have a community-based approach to addressing this issue.
All right, Uncle Ransford, if you have something to add before we move on, we have another question. I don't think so. So we have a question from Sam and Juliana. I don't know if it's both of you guys or one of you guys, but you guys can go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Kofi. It's just me. It's Sam. Yeah, Mr. Asiama, thank you very much for this the discussion that you're doing. I have a quick question. In your research concerning like first generation and second generation immigrants and their children, between different groups, like, because you did mention, I think one of our Uncle Victor had spoken about how the way parents treat their kids can have an influence on their health, on their mental health in particular. In terms of like in your research between different groups, like the Chinese, other ethnic groups, is there a correlation? Is there the rates are the same of mental illness, or yeah, I just want to know, like, because I feel like sometimes it's good to know if the way we treat our kids, but is it just within our community, or is there the trends are the same?
That's a great question. To be honest, I'll speak beyond research from an individual that's operating a big business throughout the country that supports mental health. I see the statistics, and we work heavily with the racialized population, and it is consistent in terms of whether it's the Africans or Caribbeans that are requiring support. I think what we're seeing though is in terms of the rates, there are more women accessing support. One, support is accessed usually from the woman. Period. Mental health is something that if men engage in, it's because the women in their life are leading them to it. So we want to really, I think that is the greatest thing that we have, because more kids are getting access to support because their mothers are bringing them to it. I think a very interesting statistic is really that when there's an opportunity to engage a man about in whether it's in therapy or just to support their child, there's always pushback. So I think that is consistently amongst the Caribbean culture as well as the African culture and Ghanaian specifically. So there's a lot of work to be done within our community to really support that. But, that pushback also comes because they don't know who the practitioner is that is doing the work. There's a lack of trust. There's a mistrust for the system as a whole. So a lot of times, if I don't reveal myself as a racialized or I'm Ghanaian myself, that trust is not there. But once individuals see that, oh, he's Ghanaian, everything, the doors open, right? So there is consistency in terms of from a place of accessing services. Our community is not accessing it as much as we can. But we know that, in terms of the healthcare statistics, our community, which is, the Black community specifically, continues to, struggle, whether it's, high blood pressure, stress, and these are all things that are continuously affecting us as a whole. We know that right now, there's a lot more people accessing services than they ever had. Of course, we know that the pandemic is also disproportionately affecting our community. So these are all different things, but I think the trends are pretty consistent with regards to how mental health is viewed, and nobody wants to talk about mental health, the word. For us, the reason why we call it support and growth is that's how we almost have to sell, support to individuals. Like, it's because if you add the labels, therapy and different things, it just kind of discourages people as a whole. Hopefully that answers your question.
All right, no, that's good. That's cool, man.
All right, thank you, Sam, for your question. We have another one from Abena. So Abena, if you're free to unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you, Kofi. I have a quick question for Michael. So I do so we do know that a family member do suffer from mental health, but the other extended support that's supposed to be helping this person is not really believing that the child do have mental health or is struggling with mental health, but it's so vivid of what the child is going through that they do have mental health, and that support is not coming from the extended family to support, and that family member is a healthcare worker and does not believe that this child is suffering. So how do you enlighten this family member to see that this child is suffering, because this child has been through a lot. He has seen a lot of things that a child at his age shouldn't have seen, between the dynamics between the parents, and is paying for the consequences of it. So my question is, how do you really help this other family member to see that the child is suffering and get on board so that you can help this child?
That's an amazing question, and a very common one that we get, because sometimes is if the parent doesn't wake up, the child continues to struggle. So from your lens, you just have to, that relationship is what allows people to even listen. So if you don't have that relationship with that individual, they're continuously gonna maybe even start hiding from you. They think that you're judging their child. I would say a great first step, and I always say this, is the family doctor. I think what you can do is, hey, do you have a family doctor? How do we get the child to the family doctor? Can a plan be put together to get this child to the family doctor? A lot of us trust our doctors, and the doctors usually have the best relationship with the child and the parent. Because if the doctor says it, though, I'm pretty sure that parent will take notice of it. So get them to the family doctor, because you alone, it's going to be very hard for you to preach it. And depends on how close of a relationship that you have. If you could ever get the child to the doctor, that's one thing. But if you can't, you have to be able to get the mother to get the child assessed. That is the best way. If not, you guys will just have to do it continuously, do safety plans around the child. I'm assuming there's been some risky behaviors that's making you guys concerned. But a safety plan without taking a child to a doctor is also not very productive. So I would recommend, I think that's the best step that we have. And this is where it's so important for all of us to have a family doctor, somebody that we're seeing consistently, because they are able to have conversations that a lot of times parents are not even bold enough to start addressing.
Well, the mom is involved, but the mom is also dealing with her own mental issue aspect of it, and is not opening up. But I'll skip it. If you do have a contact, I want to talk to you offline about this, because it's really personal and I don't want to get into a lot of details about it. So if you can put your information, I can get your information and I'll talk to you more in depth about this. But also my other, I don't know if it's a question or suggestion, Uncle Victor did touch base on it. It's really heartbreaking because especially in our culture, I don't even think it's just the Ghanaian culture. I work in a long-term care home, and when we do admissions on our seniors, some of their families don't even want to tell their mom suffer from dementia, from depression or from mental health, because if that is shown in application, we might not take them in the home because we don't want to deal with it. So it's not even just the African population, but mental health is a personal topic that we don't talk about, that we're ashamed. If I have it, I can't tell nobody, because if you tell somebody, you're gonna go to, oh, this person has me, she's crazy. So and also raising kids unfortunately who are not resilient is really tough, and it's scary what is going on in the world, especially in the States. You see all these Black boys are being killed, and we want to raise successful Black kids, and we don't want them to have mental health. At the same time, our parents did not give us the tool to teach our kids those things. And I used to work with a Jamaican lady, and she used to also say, all you can do is tough love, tough love. And I always tell my kids, I will defend you and I'll kill you myself. I'll be there for you no matter what. Even if you commit murder, come and tell me, because I will defend you. But I'll kill you before you probably get to jail. So our kids really need to learn that we love them no matter what. And like you said, they have to have a safe haven with us. They have to be able to come and tell us everything and anything. We have to be their first source of comfort, their first source of contact. Like, whatever how bad it is, come to me, because I have your back. And also involving the school, you have to let your kids' teacher know how pleasant you are in your school. I think my son teacher knows me more than he probably knows other parents in his class, because I make sure that I'm in contact with her, how he's doing, did anything happen. So reaching out to the teachers so that they know that your child has support at home, that if something is off at school, you're able to call and tell you, hey, Michael, so-and-so happened with Kofi today. Is there anything going on? We have to be visible in our children's life, that if something happened, they come to us first rather than going to a friend that will lead them to the wrong path.
No, I really appreciate everything you're saying, and you're right on. I think the relationship with the kids are where it starts, but then also having those important relationships with, their circle of care, whether it's their teacher. But just to add to what you said, sometimes it's not everything that the kid could tell you. This is why having somebody, whether it be, somebody that's in the church, or, you having, introducing your child to a psychotherapist, that now they have somebody that will create a safe space for them to actually speak. Sometimes I think this is where we think my child only has to tell me their problems. No, the practice of just speaking, sometimes you as a parent, you don't have the time to listen to them. So why not create space? All of us, within our benefits, we have access to psychotherapy support. Use it. Get the child somebody to speak to. You could get a Ghanaian person that, it doesn't even have to be therapy. It could just be support alone. It could be a mentor. When you connect kids, connection is so important for the overall growth of kids, right? So even if you don't trust the person that you know to help, just have a professional to work. I think that's what we need to be more open to, because that's when you're really giving the child what they need, and every child needs something different. So because your oldest was more resilient and the youngest is struggling, doesn't mean that you expect the youngest to catch up. Get him the support that he needs to do better.
All right. Thank you, Abner, for the questions and contributions. Again, we have 17 minutes. We're closing at 5. Okay, we have some on YouTube. I have a couple on YouTube. Again, raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll get to you. So I'm gonna ask if we can touch on verbal abuse, if that's possible.
Wow. Well, verbal abuse from a Ghanaian parents, that's normal communication. It is normal communication in our home. I think, you see, when we normalize that type of communication, right, at home, it also doesn't help the kids, because it creates this thing where, combative environment for kids, right? And that's not safe. Or even for relationships, it's not good. It doesn't create safety. Verbal abuse included in any relationship doesn't create safety for that person to want to share and open up. So hopefully, we could watch our tone. We're very passionate communicators. Trees are very funny language, but verbal abuse in any equation doesn't create room for safety. So that is what I would say. If there's a more specific question, then I could definitely speak on it.
Yeah, she was asking because sometimes like it can impact your social social wellness, your mental wellness, your mental health. So that's where the question was coming from. So
no,
if you want to add anything to it.
I think anybody who's subject to abuse, whether verbal or physical, you start to turn inwards, right? These are the things that impact. It affects the soul, it affects the psyche, it kills the spirit. Abuse, that's what abuse is set out to do. That's what abuse does to us. So a lot of times it's not a good thing. Abuse in any equation does not help an individual, and it's something that should be removed. And a lot of times verbal abuse, you're weak. But no, it's kids. That's how you kill somebody's self-esteem.
All right. I'm not sure. Sorry, Uncle Victor. I don't know if you're raising your hand again or it's just been up from the first time. So if you want to ask another question, you can go ahead. But again, we have 15 minutes. So again, questions you can add. You can just feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask. If not, then I'll just ask a question quickly. If someone wants to prepare a question about you dedicated your life to doing this, and if somebody also wants to go into this path of being a social worker and stuff like that, how did you start? And if you could talk about that a little bit.
You know what? My journey to doing this, like I come from a very much so, I guess, a medical background. My mother worked as a healthcare professional. My older brother works as a physician. My younger brother is in pharmacy school. So I came from a healthcare background. One thing that I knew that made me stand out was I just had a different heart from all of them. For me, when I see a problem, I can't stop thinking about it. So this is how I kind of found my path and, started really going into the mental health work that I'm doing now. I think you have to do something you love, because this work, you have to be genuine. Mental health is not a topic. If I came on today and I was just talking, I wasn't genuine, I think you guys would feel it. So, just if you want to do what I'm doing, just make sure you're passionate about it. Mental health right now is bigger than cancer. So mental health, we need more Black professionals. If you're a kid that's coming up and they say STEM, Ghanaian parents, science, technology, engineering, and math. Listen, let's add mental health to that. This mental health, the next generation, what's happening, we're gonna have so much issues happening. So anybody that wants to become a mental health professional is something that we don't have enough Black, and the racialized population in Canada is growing more than anything, but then we don't have enough Black professionals. So I would, really encourage any parent that, you don't have to say the nursing no more to the kids. Now you could tell them to be a psychotherapist or to be a social worker and to go into, there are other helping professionals professions that also pay well.
All right. Again, if you want to ask a question, we have a little bit over 10 minutes. You can raise your hand or you can just unmute yourself and ask. But in the meantime, you talked about, race and us as Black people. You said earlier on about, like, I noticed, and I think it's not anything new. See, like, maybe when like on the news, if a white person kills somebody, it's mental health. He was mentally unstable. But when a Black person commits a crime, it's he was a thug or he was in a gang. So so could you talk about that in terms of your profession and like why is it like that?
That has a lot to do with white privilege also, right? The white people have more understanding and empathy towards their own than they do towards us. And we have been seen historically as violent and aggressive individuals, even going back from why they built jails. Jails was built after slavery to keep Black people. So that's a historical lens to this, in terms of if you think about how the criminal justice system is built and then responds to Black people. So a lot of our behaviors, you have to go and actually advocate to get your case diverted to mental health court, because they see purely behavior. The suspension rates alone, and our school boards will tell you that the suspension rates are not even justified. You look at the report that came off of Peel District School Board, about 70% of the suspensions were total suspensions for the board was Black kids. But Kofi, guess how much the percentage of Black kids are for the whole board?
Wow.
10%. 70% of the total suspensions for the whole board is Black kids, but the total size of the Black population is only 10%. So if you see it, they only see behavior. And even to make it worse, the suspensions, they're coded under other. So usually when you suspend a kid within the education system, you have to put the reason for suspension, whether it's insubordination, whether it's behavior, whether it's this. But majority of the reasons for those suspensions of Black kids, right, are under the code other, meaning that they don't know why. The same reason why you get stopped, you get pulled over by a police officer, right? And they don't know why they pulled you over. So for the most part, I think to respond to your question correctly, it's white privilege and how Black people were weaponized and viewed within society.
All right, thank you. Again, please get your questions in because again, we're finishing at 5. Somebody has their mic unmuted. I don't know if it's an accident, but if you want a question, you can go ahead. If you want to ask a question, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask a question, Kofi.
Oh, go ahead now.
All right, cool. Michael, thank you again for the program. I just want to have a quick question about young Black men, those who are in unfortunate situations in terms of gangs or their society or the areas that they live in are filled with gangs, trauma, violence. What advice would you have to young Black men who feel that it's just a product of the environment, that they're just desensitized to it? Like, what avenues or what programs would you guys have for these young Black men who want to reach out and talk about these things and better their situations?
Wow, that's a big question. And, I come from such a community. I think this is where, of course, the parents play a huge role, because you have the opportunity to be that first role model for the child. So we hope that the parents, in response to your question, are on the same page as these kids in terms of, it's hard to advise the kids because they live in these environments because their parents live there. Mm-hmm. So it's the kids are in the environment and you're asking, how are they supposed to navigate themselves in an environment that is not thriving for them well? So if they're stuck there, meaning that the parents as a collective, knowing that your child is high risk or at risk, or is not doing well, or is involved in gang related issues, you cannot make the move of, maybe you don't have the privilege of being able to relocate from that space. Okay, we took that out of the equation. I think what we're doing right now, having this community conversation, and I'm actually amazed. We have 41 people on, and we've had 40 people plus the whole time. That means that there's people that care. we as a community have to wrap around these kids. I think your church is doing an amazing job, having the youth. I'm talking to Kofi. That means that there's leaders that could help these kids, meaning that we could create mentorship program. I think connection is the key to all of this. As long as you're able to have one positive person, that could change the trajectory of a young man's life. I think when I think back on my own story, and I'm sure each and everyone on here, maybe all it takes is one person. And sometimes that person doesn't even have to be the parent, but it's because the parent allowed for this. And I'm going to share a story here. So I have a young man that I'm working with, and Ghanaian kid, or I worked with historically, a Ghanaian kid, but he was born, his parents, his mom is white. So he was raised by his mom, but he's Ghanaian. The parent found me and said, hey, I noticed you have a white lady found me and said, hey, I noticed you have a Ghanaian name. My son, he doesn't have a relationship with his father, but he needs a positive mentor. I didn't even have the capacity to support any more people, but because this lady found me and took a bet on my last name that I was Ghanaian, I did everything to help this young man. And because of that now, he has now found a mentor, and I take my such relationships very serious, because I know this, otherwise he doesn't have anybody positive. And this is where kids make mistakes. We cannot blame the kids for what they don't have. So if you're a parent that's listening, or you're a young person that's listening, you need to find a connection. You need to find somebody you could relate to. You need to find somebody who could challenge you. You need to find somebody who could actually help you see what you don't see. He says, it's not that we have lack of vision, but we need that environment that's there to kind of support us, right? So as a community, we need to provide more of those relationships, for those positive mentorship. Growing up, like, I was raised by my stepdad, and I have to say openly, like, having that positive male role model. So he's not even like he's my biological father, but it doesn't take a biological father, or it doesn't have to be blood. It could be anybody that's listening. You need to have a positive connection, somebody that this child could say, you know what, I'm gonna listen to this person because he means well. There's love that I could experience. And for some kids, the kids that are really lost, they don't even see that. Somebody that could actually share their experiences with them and say, hey, you know what, I've done this before and I've made mistakes. And I think those are the environments that really help us. And I know it's a very tough question you ask, but for me, I think it's hard for the kids alone to do it. So if you're a parent that you have a high risk kid, you have to really understand what high risk means. It means that your child is at risk. And in this country now, you see it in Toronto, young Black Ghanaian kids are getting shot, are going to jail, are dealing with severe mental health issues. At risk means that you need to have an intervention. That doesn't mean you sit at home and don't do nothing. It means that, you know what, if you have your church, you bring this problem to your church and say, how can I help this child? And then everybody will come on like this. If we've had 40 people on, that means that somebody here could volunteer and help this child. And then we keep trying. It doesn't mean we give up. We keep trying until one person has that connection, and then we pull the child in.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Like you mentioned, we had 40 plus here. We also had over 25 on YouTube the entire time as well. So like you said, there are people that want to know and people that want to get educated on this. We have 4 minutes, so one more question could get asked. And then after we can pray to close. I don't know, I think if Pastor Broby, you're on, when the time comes, I'll just ask you to pray. But please, if there's one more question, we can get one more question in for Michael to answer, then we will close. So if there's anybody else, I'll give you guys maybe like a minute or so. Okay, we got another question. Okay, Uncle Ransford, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Asiama, this might be a personal question. If you belong to a professional association, did I hear you say you're a social worker?
Yes, please.
Okay, so if you belong to a professional association, the Social Workers Professional Association, how can you, through that association, bring awareness to this issue? especially at the political level, because all that we're discussing has serious policy and political implications. So how can we bring this issue to the attention of policy decision makers and politicians?
Uncle Ransom,
Is it, you want me to be specific?
No. It's a good question, and one that I'm hoping that we've building a platform. What we have as support and growth, part of our work is really educating the community, but what we're also doing is setting precedent and now working with different policymakers, different organizations to try to see how we can make this tier 1 education a priority for the community. We're trying to set up more workshops. I believe that mental health should not come from TV, it should be coming from the churches. So we have to bring the support to where people are, like what we're doing today. And I am amazed that we've had this much people on. This means that this is a topic that we need to have more on, because we just touched on a little bit of it. I also know that there's so much that us young ones can learn from our parents when we really sit down and start having these conversations. So at the political level, what we're trying to do is create a platform and rally the community and see how we could then show that initiative to the association. We're also trying to establish, right now, I have a few individuals that I know very well that we're working on building the first Black social work association. So these are things that we also know that, because sometimes at the provincial level, their initiatives are not what we want to talk about at the community level. We're also working to see how we could establish our own. I think a few years ago, the Ghanaian community, Ghanaian social workers also started an association. I think we need to work well beyond even the boundaries of our churches, to bring this conversation together, because as a community, we are so powerful, we're so talented, and I see it. But the worst thing, Uncle Ransford, is that, even now that I'm at a business level, I could talk to 2 organizations that are doing the same thing, but they don't even talk to each other. The left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. And I see the same thing a lot of times, even within our community. So I'm hoping that we could work together and, bring a more collective approach to how we solve the problems as a whole, please.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and I want to thank you, Michael, for taking the time to speak with us. Yes, from Toronto Ghanaian, the youth department, AY, the adults. I think I can speak for all of us when we say that we thank you for blessing us with your presence today. So, if you want to add anything before we pray and close, the floor is yours.
No, thank you very much. Please, for anybody, I know some people have messaged me. You could access us. A lot of people have messaged me, so I'm gonna have my email. I'm gonna put the email to everyone. I'm putting my number and email and website to in the group chat to everyone. Please do reach out. This is a conversation that we could have in a safe space. But I'm hoping that it starts at home, and then we could also then kind of have more of it as a community. I thank everybody for joining us. And Kofi, you are up next. I see you have a voice. This is I wish I was able to do this at your age. So continue to have these courageous conversations, and I hope that all your friends that are listening are also able to do so.
All right, thank you again, Pastor. If you can pray and close for us. If anything, I can pray and close if Pastor's not at the mic right now. Okay, I think I'll just do it. All right, so can everyone bow their heads and close their eyes for prayer? King Jesus, I want to thank you again for this day. I want to thank you for bringing us to this Zoom call. No matter if our week was good or bad, you brought us to this point. Life is not guaranteed, but you granted us life, and I want to thank you again for that. I want to thank you for the blessing that was Michael today, bringing him on this call to educate us about mental health. We pray that we continue to talk about this. I pray that we continue to grow and learn more about this topic and continue to have conversations about it, Lord. We're not perfect. We're not perfect beings, Lord, but the goal is to be like you, Lord. Help us to be compassionate. Help us to listen. Help us to be there for others. Help us to be more like you, Lord. as we go throughout the rest of the day and we'll go into our week. I pray that you continue to bless us and take care of us. Thank you, Lord, for everything you have done and all that you continue to do for us. In your name I do pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much for having me, Kofi.
No problem.
All right. So please check the chat, and Kofi, you could just kind of have the information and share it to everybody also.
Yeah, sure. I'll copy it and post it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right. This meeting is closed, I guess. Everyone have a good rest of the day.